Hey everybody, welcome back, and here is part 2 of the Q&A from the questions that you guys have sent me, which I really appreciate. And I did want to add one more thing that I completely forgot to add yesterday when I was talking about my favorite flashback weekend memory, and that was actually the Robert Englund and Freddy Krueger makeup photo op, which is actually probably my favorite photo op ever. So getting back to your questions, I have a couple here from Mr. Dark. First up is, who has the better movies, Arnold or Sly? I think from a technical standpoint, Sly actually does have the better movies. I just think he's the much more creative one out of the two. Nothing against Arnold, I love Arnold, but I mean, if you consider how many films that Sylvester Stallone wrote specifically and the ones that he's directed, most of them I absolutely love. However, I will say that probably out of the two of them, Arnold has more of my personal favorites. I mean, especially if I think of stuff like Terminator, Predator. So, yeah, Total Recall. Probably lean towards personal favorites, probably being Arnold, while Stallone's films are probably the better ones, if that makes sense. And then as a follow-up, better franchise, Rocky or Rambo? Rocky is the better franchise because over the course of all of the films, you do actually have a progression of the Rocky character. Even through some of the lesser films, the progression of the character is still there. Again, however, my personal favorite is the Rambo films. If I'm going to sit down and watch either of the ones, they're going to be the Rambo one. But I acknowledge the Rocky films are actually the better films, but the Rambo films are the ones that I actually do sit down and watch. And the next question is a fun one. Favorite 80s cartoon? I actually have probably two, I would say. Three. But two for sure. I would say it's kind of a tie between Transformers and Voltron, although I do also love Thundercats as well. But when I really think of the top of the list, I would say Transformers and Voltron. Although if I had to pick out of the two, I would say Transformers. And then finally, Mr. Dark asked, favorite movie, Munchies? Stupid question, I know, just thought asking something different would be fun. Not a stupid question. My answer may be stupid, but not a stupid question. So because I am on a low-carb diet, unfortunately, movie Munchies are not a thing for me outside of kind of rare occasions. But my favorite one is popcorn. Actually, not to kind of go with probably the obvious answer, but it's true. I mean, I just love good popcorn. I think I got that from my grandmother. She loved popcorn too. And what's cool too is a couple years ago, I actually bought one of those popcorn makers and got some of those special popcorn packets that you use. So the one that I really like is called Mega Pop. I'm sure it's not healthy for you at all, but I mean, to me, it's the one that tastes just like movie theater popcorn. And as far as candy goes, Kit Kats a lot. That was a common one. Probably my favorite one though is Dots. Especially when I was in Chicago and I used to go to Music Box Theater all the time. I would get a popcorn and a thing of Dots. And that was so for me, that's what that reminds me of. Next up are two questions from Andrew Bellina. The first one is a good one. Who's your favorite actor? So it kind of shifts. When I was younger, Robert De Niro was actually my favorite actor, even though I still love all of his earlier stuff. I would say I'm trying to think of people who if they were really in a movie, all of a sudden the movie just becomes that much better because they're in it. So I was kind of thinking about it along those lines. So I came up with three. Joseph Cotten, definitely one of my all-time favorite actors. If he's in a movie, I absolutely love it. He's in one of my favorite movies of all time, The Third Man. I just think he was very much an underrated actor. Another one, which is obvious, would be Vincent Price. Vincent Price is in a movie. It's a good movie. There's something so magical about watching a movie with Vincent Price in it that I don't know, there's something, I always kind of equate it to, it brings out a kid in me. And then finally, Joe Spinell, actually. When I see Joe Spinell did so many small parts in so many movies. I mean, obviously for a lot of us, he's best known as, the Maniac for Maniac. But overall, he actually did a lot of small parts in big movies. The Godfather, Rocky, and a bunch of other movies. So whenever I see him pop up somewhere, it's Joe! Next up is a question from Melika Olam. What is the first movie you saw in the theater? I actually don't really remember, but I will say the first movie I saw in the theater that I think really impacted me, because it's one that I really remember, I think so specifically, is actually because I was really young. I don't know how I managed to convince my dad to take me to go see Creepshow. I'm surprised they even let me in. I mean, yes, I was with my dad, but still. And I remember so specifically, getting freaked out from some of the more horrific stuff. But I was actually fine, and I was just having a blast with it until it got to the crate. The crate freaked me out so much. I actually went out into the lobby, and I remember that the door actually had a big glass that, I wasn't very tall. Not that I'm that tall today, but, it had like a big glass sort of window on the door. And so from the lobby, I remember I was literally watching the crate, so freaked out, but there was almost like that comfort thing, and I was having a blast. And then by the end of what I can't remember exactly is whether or not it was at the point when they pushed the crate into the water, or if it was at the very, very beginning of they're creeping up on you. Somewhere in there is when I came back in. So not the first movie I ever saw in a theater. It's definitely one that really, really sticks out to me. Next up are 2 questions from CMB76. So the first question, which you guys will probably, hopefully, be able to help. As a kid, I remember seeing a film in which some guys are at a restaurant or diner. One of them has a pet tarantula, and another guy picks it up and eats it. The dialogue was something like, "What did you do that for?" The answer was, "Because I was hungry." It's been bugging me for years. I don't know what that is, but it sounds vaguely familiar. So I don't know if you guys know what it is. Definitely say something, because poor guy, it's been torturing him for years trying to find the answer. And then the second question is, if you could make a film with your dream cast and crew, unlimited budget, what would it be and who would be in it? That's an interesting question that I think I would have been able to answer probably more specifically a couple years ago. Whereas right now, I would actually much more prefer to do smaller budget stuff. Almost have much more of like a John Carpenter career. Kind of having a little bit more control because the budget would be so low, so I'd have more creative control over it, and without the heavy burden of it having to make like, $200 million. But at the same time, that sort of defeats the purpose of the question, but would love to make a Star Wars film. That would be phenomenal to be able to play in that universe. To be able to jump into Star Wars, even just doing The Mandalorian or something like that, just, an episode of that would mean a lot to me personally. Next up are a couple questions from The Moth 7. He's an up-and-coming filmmaker, so one day we're all going to be clamoring to go watch all of his films. First question is, where would you put Tom Atkins in a list of your favorite actors? Because he's a big Tom Atkins fan. He would be up there. He's definitely, I would actually put Tom Atkins in with the other actors who, if Tom Atkins is in a movie, it does sort of raise the level of the movie for me. Next question is, if you were stuck on an island with 7 actors, directors, who would they be? I don't know if I actually would want to be stuck on an island with any actor or director. Actually, I'm going to change the question slightly, and I hope that's okay. I'm going to think more of a dinner. Like if I could go to dinner with some people. I don't know about 7. Let me think. I think would be really, really fascinating. As a director, I would say Martin Scorsese. I would love to sit down and talk to Martin Scorsese. I think that would be a fascinating conversation. His insight into movies is really remarkable. Anytime I see him interviewed or he did this thing years ago. It was like the journey through cinema. I can't remember the exact name. It was really, really fascinating. I would love to have dinner with him. An actor I would think would also be fascinating to sit down with, only because he never does interviews. That'd be Jack Nicholson. I have a feeling some of the stories he has to tell would be legendary. And then finally, he asked, what are 5 films that you'd want to remake? Only one sequel if you wanted to remake one. That's a good question. I don't know if there's anything I'd actually want to remake. I think because I already have like so many already written screenplays and also just story ideas for films that I can't really think of any I would officially like remake. Like I think I mentioned before, there are some films where aspects of them have worked their way into my own stuff, but like an overt remake, I do kind of wish I could remake The Force Awakens, only because I really never got the follow-up Star Wars film I really wanted. And I actually wrote up a story treatment of what I wish episode 7 was going to be, and I was actually going to do a video on that, but I just couldn't figure out the best way to really present it, because I didn't want to just sit here and me reading, my little synopsis. Obviously, that's not going to happen, especially since some of the cast members are no longer around, but, in a dream scenario, yeah, that probably would be one. Gary Richardson has a couple of good questions. So first up is, do you keep a list of films that you want to watch? What would be on that list? How often is a movie that you watch one that you're watching for the first time? I get the feeling you are missing out on some good stuff because you keep rewatching Ghoulies. Actually, I do love Ghoulies, although for the record, I actually haven't watched Ghoulies in a long time. I do have sort of an unwatched pile, although I have been sort of putting some up on the shelf. I don't actually have like a formal list. Try and get through my unwatched ones as best I can. But a lot of times, sometimes it's like, man, I just really want to rewatch like this movie or that movie. I will say though, I don't watch as many newer films as I used to. I actually have a lot more fun discovering older films that I haven't seen. So sometimes like when a film, let's say from Vinegar Syndrome, Severin, or Arrow, Scream Factory, although most of Scream Factory stuff I've seen already. But I mean, whenever some of these companies like put out a movie I haven't seen, again, especially one from 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, early 90s, I'm always just like, ooh, I want to see that. Or something more recent, it would have to be more like, a friend of mine was just like, I think you should see this movie, I think you'll like it. Next up, Gary asks, what equipment do you use to make your videos? The reason I ask is that the image and sound is so good, while major network newscasters, talk show hosts, etc. that are broadcasting from home look and sound so bad. I realize that maybe they don't have anyone able to come over to their house and get them set up, but I'd like to think they could at least be shipped some decent equipment and a walkthrough set up over the phone. They're billion-dollar companies that specialize in broadcasting images and sound. And yet some unpaid guy talking about cannibal exploitation Blu-rays is blowing them away. First up, thank you, and hopefully not unpaid for too much longer. And actually, I agree completely. I've been actually really surprised by the overall quality of a lot of quote-unquote professionals. There are YouTubers that I watch that they just use their phone and it looks and sounds like 10 times better than these supposed professionals doing it who are in like prime time, doing stuff. Now, my equipment does vary in different ranges, but overall, for example, most of these videos that I do, my setup is actually very, very simple. I have my Sony a7R II, and yes, it's the 2, so it's already, a couple generations old, with a Sony 35mm lens on the front of it, and I have the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus whatnot doing audio. And because I'm using a 35mm lens, the camera is actually very, very close. So that's why I can use the mic, which is actually on top of the camera. Otherwise, I do have lavs that I can use. I have actually 2 different sets of lavs from Rode. I really like Rode. But I also have a boom mic I can set up in more professional situations. I have a Rotolite Neo, which is what's set up right here, which is just a small LED light. And then a Dracast LED light, which is actually over here, which gives me a little bit of light here, but mainly helps light up the background. And then the statues and stuff back there, that's just lit up by these little LED buck lights I got from Home Depot or something. So this is very, very simple. I meant to keep this as simple as possible. But I do have other lights. I actually do have a couple more, for example, the Roto lights. I do have a couple more of those. I have other LED lights if I need them. And then my main camera, which I will use for certain things, but I don't need it for some of the quick stuff like this, is I do have a Sony FS7, which is my professional 4K camera. And then finally, Gary asks, you keep mentioning that various films are an influence on your own work. Where can we see your stuff? I have a couple things online, but I think they're all private or password protected at the moment. A lot of it just has to do with some business aspects. I think a couple of the short films are public. I'll have to double check, actually. But yeah, I had a lot of them, because I was submitting some stuff to festivals online and things like that. But I definitely want to have a lot more stuff out there available for people to see. So hopefully sooner rather than later. I have a question from BMG501. Would you ever do unboxings from fans in the future? The answer is yes. I actually want to set up a PO box, not just to receive stuff, but actually I want to start doing like a couple giveaways and things like that and be able to send stuff out. After some of this madness ends, hopefully I can go and do that. Ryan Verrill asks, what other creators do you follow in this space, e.g. YouTube, podcasts, social pages? I actually follow a lot of you guys. So if you guys actually have like YouTube channels and you're uploading stuff, I subscribe. Now I don't always comment as often as I like to. At the very least, you know, watch it and give it a thumbs up. I try and comment when I can. Sometimes what happens is it's sort of ironic, but I actually have less time to watch stuff now. So what I do is when I get a chunk of time, I'll actually pull up a bunch of them. So I have all these tabs and I just kind of go one by one and I'll watch them. And again, I try and comment because I think it's a nice way to show that, you know, somebody's watched your things, but at the very least, you know, again, I watch it and I give it a thumbs up. And then a couple people who, as far as I know, aren't subscribed to me, I kind of doubt it, that I do like watching on YouTube. I like Cinemassacre. I like The Critical Drinker. I think he's really funny. Mauler, his reviews I think are really funny. I like Metal Jesus Rocks. I think that's a really fun, like, classic game channel. For filmmaking and photography stuff, I really like Philip Bloom and Jason Lanier. Even though I'm not a huge car guy, I actually do like Doug DeMuro's reviews. I think they're really, really funny. I like Cecil Says. I think he's hilarious. At some point, I want to actually get him to do an interview because he's a big horror movie fan. I like comic artist Pro Secrets, Ethan Van Sciver. I think he's really, really funny. But again, then I watched like all you guys. I don't want to go down a list because I know I'll forget somebody. Really, the stuff that you guys put out. I mean, again, that's kind of the stuff I like watching. And then finally, a question from Madman. Do you strictly watch your movies mainly in a home theater or do you use other methods? It's kind of mixed. It depends on what it is I'm watching. I do watch more movies here in the home theater than I do anywhere else. Otherwise, I'm mainly probably watching movies in my bedroom. But like, for example, this room, I don't have anything else hooked up to it. So the only thing hooked up is the 4K player. So that's actually all I can watch in here. And I set that up specifically, even though I can stream some like Netflix stuff through the player. I actually wanted to keep this pretty dedicated to basically physical media only room. And then in my bedroom is where I have like cable and my Apple TV. And I do have a Blu-ray player in there as well. Those two are mainly where I watch all my movies. So that is it for part 2 of the Q&A. If anyone else has any questions, definitely let me know. Easy enough for me to do another video. And again, I really appreciate all the questions. It's a lot of fun to do. So as always, thank you for watching and I will see you on the next one.